wrong one. Still gotta get used to these buttons. Hi everybody, it's me, Schlug, and I'm back with another stream. And we're back with a classic, a true classic of classics. We're back with the Laser Pig. Yes, we are here with Laser Pig. Why are we here? Well, because he's got a new T-72 video out. Now, before I get started, I'm pretty sure there are some people that are new to my channel who are probably wondering, where's my part 1 to this? Because this is part 2. Well, that's on my archive channel. Go check it out. There's a link to it somewhere. I'll find it. I'll get it up eventually. I'm still settling in. So, yes, if you want to see the original, it will be on my archive. The part 1, it will be on my archive channel. So, please go check it out there. But until then, we are going to be watching Laser Pigs.
What the dog doing?
The dog is about to talk about why the T-72 sucks. Because, yeah, we got into it with Soviet tank design a lot with Laser Pig, and I expect heavy drinking and lots of madness. Oh, boy. Let's see where this goes.
Hydrate, you bastard! Hydrate!
Oh, we're gonna be hydrating already.
Hello. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. If you haven't watched part 1, you should go back and watch it, or this might get a bit confusing for you. Or just go ahead and watch it anyway. I don't care. I'm not gonna tell you what to do. I'm not your dad. You rebel. Look at you go. Fighting the system. Wow. Anyway, I gotta pay rent.
So do I.
Live from her Central Greg's command center deep behind enemy lines, the war on freedom continues. This is Big Jackie and News Battle Radio Network.
The return of Big Jackie?
I'm telling you, the French are deploying weaponized baguettes. I read it on patriottrutheagle.ru. The globalists are trying to suppress the gluten-based warfare. These people are demons. I've said it before. It's just like it's written in the Rosemary Connolly Hip and Thigh Diet Cookbook. They enter the body of the French whenever they think about bread, which is all the time. They're worming into the minds of children. Oh, shut your face, Jackie. My holistic tarot form clearly states the French military are just doing collective interpretive dance to appease the ghosts of dead orphans lost during the Great Yeast Flood of 37. This is typical of the mainstream media, ignoring
I know this is an ad because I see the QR code.
Hello, I'm
news.
Laser Pig, and I'm definitely a real historian. Are you like me? Does your parents' media literacy perpetually hover somewhere between a concussed ferret and a bucket of expired tubby custard?
Fortunately,
Are
no.
you surrounded by people who get all their geopolitical analysis from Facebook memes and psychic vibrations? This is a deep state-run cost-cutting measure to get your children addicted to bread so we can all be breadologically tagged, working down in the grain mines. The truth is written in the pasties, folks. That's why today's sponsor is Grand
leave my fucking
News.
flatbread alone.
Them boys suck, sheeple. The children yearn for the fields. If you're tired of feeling like you're losing your mind
can I order
every time you look at the internet,
Yeah.
Grand News is your salvation. It's a website and app that pulls together news from across the political spectrum, so you can see exactly how different
Ground
outlets
News
are
is actually
spinning
pretty
the
reputable.
exact same
They're actually a
story.
good service.
Let's
I
take
recommend
Jackie
them.
and Donna's collective psychotic break, for instance. If you were to look at Ground News now, you could use their blind spot feature to show you when a story is being heavily covered by the left, the right, the center, or just completely ignored by everyone. Because if your news is only coming from one side, you're not getting the news, you're getting a bedtime story. My tarot cards do not have political bias. Donna, you tried to vote for a cheese pasty the other day. He made some convincing points, I'll have you know. Ground News also has this brilliant feature where it shows you the ownership of the publication you're reading. So when Jackie reads an article about French bread-based artillery, Ground News can gently
Bread-based
inform her
artillery.
the site
That
is owned
that
by a
actually does
man
sound like
who
something the
thinks the
French
news
would
is a
actually
hologram.
do.
Well, my truth is my truth, and Big Wheat will not silence
Hey,
me.
Coop.
Ground News doesn't tell you what to
Yes,
think.
thank you,
It just
Coop.
gives you the raw data so that you can stop being manipulated by clickbait and propaganda. It compares headlines side by side,
Or
so
you
you
could
can see
be as
what's
I do,
being
just wait for
said
the madness
by
to
who
stop.
in real time, and it's entirely up to you how you interpret it. It's a service I use all the time. This is exactly what I'd expect from some brain-dead, cuck-pilled millennial to say. I prefer just reading from the headlines, getting incredibly angry at marginalised groups, and then complaining to the cashier at Tesco. Go to ground.news/laserpig or just click the link in the
What
description.
pisses me off is people like that
40% off
are
the
actually
Vantage
in
plan,
existence.
which is the same plan I'm using. It gives you all the data, all the charts, all the tools you need to not end up like these two. The Eiffel Tower is a 5G antenna for mind controlling the snails. Did he let the snails touch you, Jackie? That's how my cousin got turned back into a goose. Please click the link in the description. I need money to soundproof the basement. Now let's get back to the video.
All right, let's talk about Soviet
Let's go back
bullshit.
to our previous thought exercise. You are the Soviet Union.
I don't want to be the Soviet Union. Thank you.
Okay. You remember my T-34 video from 4
Yes.
years ago?
Yeah.
Fucking hell, have I been doing this that long?
Yep.
This was supposed to just be a hobby. Anyway,
I know,
you'll
but
remember the whole story
yeah.
about the T-34's designer, Mikhail Koshkin, and how he
Yes.
proved the great success of the T-34 by driving the prototypes up to Moscow and then back again to impress Stalin.
Yeah, I
And
remember
then
that.
got sick and died. Well,
Yeah.
Koshkin was replaced by the head of the design team at Kharkiv by Alexander Morozov. And it's Morozov that does the major legwork turning the A-20 into the T-34. Like everyone else at the Kharkiv tank factory, Morozov was packed up and moved to the Urals, along with most of Soviet tank production at the time. Morozov and the Kharkiv Bureau was sent to Nazili Tagil, and that's where Ural gets its start as a tank factory. And after the Second World War ends, the Soviet Union is left with 5 major tank factories. The Kirov factory in Leningrad, the rebuilt Kharkiv factory in Ukraine, the second Leningrad factory transferred to Omsk that becomes Transmash. I think I'm saying that right, I'm probably not. And the
Who cares?
Trigolin's tractor factory, known in World War II as Tankograd. You may note I said 5 major tank factories and then only listed 4. That's because no one can agree on which of the other tank factories was the 5th great one, and I'm not wading into that argument.
Why? Why?
And for the sake of
Pig.
time and subject constraints as well as my own sanity, we're going to ignore the other
You-
3
you
cases
still
of the
have
Soviet
sanity,
tank
Pig?
industry
I'm
for
not
now
sure about that.
until they become relevant, because this video is already over an hour long, and that is a bullshit mine we just don't have time for today if I hope to get this video out before Christmas. Once Kharkiv is rebuilt in 1951, Morozov transfers back and leaves behind a protege that had been part of his work since 1949 in charge at Ural. That
that
protege is a man called Leonid Kartsev, the designer responsible for the T-54 being upgraded to the T-55 and the lead designer of the T-72. Like his fellow designers, Kartsev has a little bit of an ego. He's stood in the
wait, a
shadow
tank
of
commander,
giant,
a tank
and
builder
now
has an
he's out
ego
to prove
in the
himself.
Soviet
The
Union.
T-62 is his baby. It's his pride and joy, and it eats at him relentlessly that it's only ever seen as a bigger T-55, a stopgap. He is sick of living in Morozov's shadow, and so he's working on something quite interesting. We'll get back to him in a moment. Morozov, on the other hand, is oddly humble. The T-34 was mostly his work, but he doesn't claim credit for it. He's an engineer
Really?
at heart, and he buries himself in his work more than anything else. And because of that, he's sort of seen as this quirky, weird, quiet genius by Soviet society, and ends up with quite a lot of political fame. And since his return to Kharkiv, he has been hard at work on his magnum opus.
Wait, he's one of those. He built one of those. That's the title.
Now, it's important to remember that Khrushchev, after his rise to power, has very different ideas from Stalin about where tanks should go. Thanks to that previously mentioned bureau, he sees heavy tanks as, well, stupid, and decides
Yes.
to cancel all heavy tank development across
Yes.
the Union,
What's
which
wrong with
puts
Khrushchev did
Morozov
do?
and Kartsev,
Respect to Khrushchev, getting rid of those
tank
stupid heavy
designers,
tanks.
ahead of their rivals at the other design bureaus, especially in Leningrad, who had been happily producing the Union's last heavy tank, the T-10, which you might know better as the IS-8, and putting an end to both its replacements, the Object 770, and the people will get mad if I don't mention it, the Object 279, both of which were being designed in Leningrad at the time, granted in different factories. But that
And
leaves
super
the Union without a
fucking weird.
future tank
Like,
program.
first, okay, let's talk about some of the weirdness of Russian heavy tanks. Basically, so pre-Khrushchev, Stalin era, everyone, like every megamaniacal dictator, he thinks bigger is better and shinier and scarier and will keep the peasants in line and keep them from, revolting. So what Stalin did was basically put out thousands of heavy tanks, specifically along the IS line. So the IS-2, 3, 4, and so on. The magnum opus of this, as Pig stated, was the T-10. This was a beefy fucking tank. It had thick armor, a giant fucking cannon, and literally was one of the heaviest tanks ever produced, bar the fucking mouse. However, they weren't done yet. They soon began working on other ones.
The IS-8 and putting an end to both its replacements, the Object 770.
So the 770 was basically the T-10, but basically modernized. It had a very modern system. It was built more along the lines most modern tanks go by: a turret in the middle instead of up front. The crew compartment more up forward, a more rounded hull, and more sturdier tracks. Pretty decent design, still abysmally heavy. Like, literally, the biggest issue with heavy tanks is transportation. Logistic-wise, these are not good tanks. These tanks will make logistics engineers cry. This is the shit. If you show up to a train yard with about 60 of these things, you're gonna make every fucking individual in that works in that rail depot cry. You will break men. Men will be broken when looking at these things. But then some fucking psycho came up with,
And the people will get mad if I don't mention it, the Object 279. Both of
the 279, I gotta get it.
70.
Come on.
And the people will get mad if I don't mention it, the Object.
The 279, okay. Now this is what happens this is the caption of the meme. Drugs are bad. Because whoever came up with this was obviously on something. Because, I mean, look at this monster. Basically, the whole idea with it, he took the whole idea of a rounded hull that will be able to ricochet rounds and shit like that, and took it way too fucking seriously. Oh, and when he said he wanted to make it even more all-terrain, well, he said, you know what? Our tanks are already all-terrain with 2 tracks. Imagine what they could be with 4. Yes, you can see right down there. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, this was a nightmare. I'm gonna go back to Facebook Market. Oh, we are looking at a Russian abomination, my dear Kurd. We are looking at an absolute abomination. We're looking at literally one of the worst tanks ever designed, and believe me, I've seen some bad ones. Oh, if life is hard... That is a great fucking quote there, Kurt. That is the perfect definition of this thing. Life is hard. It could be hard. It can be harder. That's the motto of the Soviet Union. Congratulations. Congratulations, Comrade Kurt. You are gifted 500 rubles for creating new Soviet statement. Bravo, bravo. Round of applause. Anyone who stops applauding before I do gets shot. Oh, so yeah. Basically, Russian heavy tanks were an abysmal nightmare because the only reason that they were producing heavy tanks at all was to compete with the German heavy tanks like the King Tiger and such. But unlike the rest of the world, when the Germans were defeated and the King Tigers and Tiger tanks were no longer coming at them, the Western Allies stopped. With exceptions to France. France was weird. France is weird. France is very, 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 very fucking weird. But the Russians just kept on going. But it literally took Stalin dying and Khrushchev taking power for him to say, okay, our bridges can't handle heavy tanks anymore. We need to stop producing them. And finally, these two were stopped. And this is where the main battle tanks took over, which we shall now continue
both of
on
which
with.
were being designed in Leningrad at the time, granted in different factories. But that leaves the Union without a future tank program. So when the Premiership starts sniffing around for a replacement to the T-72 and get word that the legendary designer of the T-34, Alexander Morozov, is building a new medium tank for the modern age, naturally, they get excited. So excited that Purokatsov and his proposal are shoved to the side. And that pisses him off. Morozov has spent nearly the entirety since Stalin's death working on his new tank. Now, it's expensive, but this new tank features a lot of new technological innovations, some of which are unheard of before on a tank, and it's exactly what the Soviets were looking for. It's got a new composite armor system, which allows it to be as armored as some of the Union's heaviest tanks, but weigh no more than 30 tons. It carries a whopping 125mm cannon linked to an extremely competent stabilization system. Later models would even have an onboard targeting computer. And best of all, it's got an autoloader, the first in the Union, meaning not only can it fit that larger gun without having to make the tank bigger, but it only needs 3 crew to operate. It sounds too good to be true, but there's a slight problem. The problem is that the paranoid-driven, ever-changing demands placed on the design by all these new innovations that the Soviets insist the design needs, plus all the little extras the various higher-ups keep adding, means the holy V2 engine you were expecting to use now doesn't fit into the engine bay.
Yeah.
So, rather than redesign the entire tank to accommodate a larger engine bay, the designers turned to a newly designed, highly compact, opposed piston-style engine, the 5T DF. Now, there's a bit of a controversy as to where this engine comes from.
Yeah.
Some say it's actually a German bomber engine, claiming the Soviets backwards engineered the Jumu 205 used on the Ju-86.
I've heard that rumor.
Because they did. It's what powers the TA-3 diesel train. Well, it's the Fairbanks Morse 3881 of which the Jumu was developed from, but you get the drift. So, is it the same engine, or at least a development of it? No. Anyway, getting back to Morozov. Morozov also has been unable to avoid the demands of the higher-ups, and the constant micromanaging has caused the complexity of this new tank to start piling up, and all of these technological innovations come at a price. Not only is Morozov's tank far more expensive, it's proving difficult to even produce in the first place. New technology takes time to develop and cannot be rushed. Early prototypes
let's put this, here's the thing, we're running into the same roadblock every project in the Soviet Union runs into, and that is the problem of they come up with all these good ideas, but they don't have the infrastructure or the resources to build these in quality or quantity. It becomes a problem. This is the issue with the Soviet Union. This was always the issue with the Soviet Union. Their infrastructure is absolutely stagnant, and it's not good. It is really not good. So yes, what Morozov is building, which will eventually end up as the T-72, was always flawed from the start, and this is where we lead to a lot of problems. Like, we'll probably talk about that fancy autoloader in a little bit. Well, I'll let the pig keep ranting.
Types are plagued with issues, and the design is revised a number of times with even more prototypes, which is racking up the cost. Now, it could be argued this is just what procurement looks like, but in the Soviet Union, remember, mistakes don't happen. It's not so much the cost, it's the political embarrassment that's racking up. And too much political embarrassment means your political rivals start spotting opportunities for advancement. You see, Morozov has a problem. He's humble. But in the political circles of the Union, that humbleness is a weakness. Well, the tankies will always see the politics of the Union through the Disneyfied-esque rose-tinted glasses that simplify everything so that they can understand it and brush away any critique as Western propaganda. In reality, the Kremlin was a thunderdome of paranoid psychopaths. And though things have calmed down since Stalin's death, it's not absent during the Khrushchev era. In the Union, power does not come from the voters. It comes from proximity to the top and violently being able
Yeah, we want to talk about like fucking egos and shit like this and the bombastic psychopaths. Believe it or not, Khrushchev actually could rival Stalin. Because my favorite quote of Khrushchev when it comes down to him and his psychotic breaks. So the big thing about Khrushchev's era was, of course, missile ramp-ups. There was a huge ramp-up in Soviet ICBMs. And Khrushchev famously said that they were cranking out ICBMs like they were sausages. Yes, that is an actual quote. But in the end, a lot of that stuff. Here's the big thing about the Soviet Union when it comes to their thing, and it actually it's something about Russia as well. They're big on chest thumping, big time chest thumping. Like in the Soviet Union, it's always grander and bigger and all these big blah 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 blah. Yeah. Here's the thing, when the West starts thumping its chest, we actually have some strength behind that thumping. Mainly because it's not just us. We have, when I say the West, I mean everybody. America, France, Spain, Germany, England, Italy, Poland, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Croatia, so on and so forth. But with the Soviet Union, it's a whole different mess. It's a whole different can of worms.
To crush anyone to take your spot, of which Khrushchev would do twice.
Basically,
forcing
the bigger
Malenkov
your chest
aside
thump,
to assume power,
the
and then
bigger
resisting
the more
an
likely you are to
attempted coup
advance.
later on. He would, of course, finally lose a third power battle, which resulted in the rise of Brezhnev. In that kind of system, humility is a weakness. And a weakness is a provocation. If you're humble, if you defer to others, if you step out of the spotlight to let others take your place, the other sharks in the tank don't look at you as if you're a grounded, realistic, altogether decent fellow. They look at you and go, huh.
It's free real estate.
They would immediately steal your portfolio, take
Excuse
credit
me,
for
puppies. It's just either Mom or Angie. Chill.
your successes, blame you for their failures, and then have you exiled to a weather station in Omsk just to tie up any loose ends. But humbleness is also just a little bit suspicious. Why aren't you taking credit for the tractor factory? Do you know something about it that I don't? Is it secretly failing? Why are you so quiet during the toast for the General Secretary? Do you secretly hate him? Are you plotting something? Why don't you want that promotion? Why are you so shy when praised? Are you a bourgeoisie sympathizer? Are you working for the CIA? In the Soviet Union, the people who hid from the spotlight were the people who had something to hide. If you weren't thumping your chest and clapping the loudest, then people would start to wonder what you're actually up to.
Wow, that sounds familiar, don't it?
Circling. And in a way, that's what's going to happen to poor old Morozov. His failures are racking up, and his refusal to play the game is becoming his downfall. Because keep in mind, it's not just him that this is looking bad on, it's everyone who supports him. If someone supports you and you can't fail to deliver, then that looks bad on them, and the sharks start circling them as well. So the first thing that they're going to do is drop you like a fucking stone, and maybe comment that their faith in you was misplaced, and that's your fault.
Yep.
You see, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes things going on. Not only is every other tank factory also competing with this design, because they want to be the ones with the honor of designing and building the next generation of Soviet armored equipment, the factory that builds the V2 engine is now also complaining that they will go out of business, and all those workers will be unemployed. And the Soviet space program has raised concerns about the proposal for a computerized targeting computer, because if we start building tanks with computers, well, then there won't be enough computers for them, and they need them all, and they get priority. They're the space program. But for now, Morozov is being protected by something quite strange.
Really? Explain. An elaborate and somewhat friendly explanation of how Soviet society worked on a local level. Oh no, are we doing a deep dive on Soviet Union? Oh no, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble, chat. Oh no, this is not gonna end well for me. This is not gonna end well for me. This is really not gonna end well. I get to talk about all the messed up shit Soviet citizens had to go through. Oh, I'm about to receive a lot of hate mail. I get sent to Gulag. If you guys find me in Siberia, you'll know what happened. Let's get on with it. I'm in trouble.
It's not particularly well known or well documented in the West, but the Soviet Union had its own version of the fighter plane mafia.
No! Oh,
For those of you who don't know who the fighter plane mafia are,
Fuck
then
these
where have you
guys.
been? I rant about these fuckers all the time. As a quick recap, they're essentially the people behind almost all the critique of anything made by the US military in the past 60 years that's more mechanically advanced than a toothbrush. Without getting too much into it, their core belief is that the US military relies too heavily on advanced technology, and that the failure rate and expense of said technology would mean that any future war would be won by the side who could produce the cheapest and simplest weapons in bulk. There, I ranted about the fighter plane mafia. You may tick that box off your Laserpick bingo cards.
Check.
Now that is not to say the Soviets had an equivalent of a
Couple more and
bunch
I
of
get bingo.
boring old career men sitting in a basement whining about how they know better than everybody else and taking credits for the projects that they had nothing
that's
to do
Reddit
with.
in a
No,
nutshell.
it's more of a... Okay, how best to explain this? Alright, let's go back. All the way back to the T-34. The T-34 sucks. I
Yep.
made a video about this way back in the day. I've mentioned it earlier. So to prevent me
I
repeating
reacted to it.
myself... See, there's this brain worm
Nice.
that lives in the minds of many people when they picture the T-34. They see the stereotype of the Russian tank. They see this rough and ready brawler, something designed to be cheap and rugged and reliable and churned out by illiterate peasants by the thousands. That is a lie. The T-34 is not a cheap tank. The T-34 is an expensive tank that was produced cheaply. And there is a difference. To put that in perspective, imagine the Germans just decided to one day go all in on the Tiger. No more Panthers or Panzers or Hetzers, just Tigers. Thousands of them every month. But they don't have the factories for that. They don't have the skilled labor. They don't have the resources. So in order to meet the impossible quota set by the funny mustache man, they must start cutting corners. And suddenly you have Tigers being built without glass periscopes, Tigers without machine guns or without chairs, Tigers where the welding was done by a guy who learned what welding was 5 minutes ago, Tigers where half the bolts are missing so it rattles itself apart, and Tigers where the transmission gears aren't heat treated so they turn into metal glitter after about 10 kilometers. Not because the Germans can't produce any of those things to a high standard, but a combination of strict deadlines, unskilled labor, and quite severe forced punishment for any delays creates a
Yep.
situation where if someone doesn't have enough bolts to fix the engine in place, well, rather than wait for more, they just make do with what they have and just ration all the bolts between the frames to get them out of the factory quickly. Because if you delay production for whatever reason, the SS will shoot you in the back of the head and your family will get sent to the Eastern Front.
Yep.
That is the T-34. It was never designed to be a cheap, mass-produced horde tank, unlike the Sherman, which is why it's cheaper, more reliable, and arguably better. The
Yep, the Sherman's
T-34
the
was a
best tank
high-tech
of World War
medium
II.
tank that got forced
Changed
into
my
the
mind.
sweatshop, and it's debatable if the Soviets had just produced less of them, but to a higher quality, they would have achieved the same result, but with less death. But in the Union, you can't exactly turn around and tell people, actually, all those deaths were unnecessary.
Very.
So when the war ends and the dust settles, the Soviets need a story. And thus, the mythos is born. We get that quote, that fucking quote. Quantity has a quality all on its own.
Suck
I
my
hate this
left
quote so much.
nut.
It is the calling card of every armchair general, every tanky, every Hearts of Iron player who thinks drawing an arrow on a map makes them fucking Napoleon. It's the live, laugh,
Playing
love
Hearts
of
of
military
Iron. It's a fun
incompetence,
game
because
when
when
I'm
you
being
apply it to the
stupid.
T-34, it isn't praising the tank, it is excusing the incompetence of the military using it. The
Yeah.
sheer number of T-34s becomes the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for waving off any critique of the tank. Does the tank fall apart after 50 miles because the engine filter eats dirt? Doesn't matter. We have 500 more. Did the Germans destroy 100 of them in a single afternoon because the commander had no radio and was communicating with flags? Irrelevant. We outnumber them 10 to 1. Did we build 10 tanks and 5 of them not even start? Who cares? The other 5 will work. It is compensating because that isn't strategy. That is a panic response.
Yep.
The sheer volume of T-34s was used to mask a terrifying reality that for a significant portion of the war, the Red Army was essentially throwing everything, including the kitchen sink and the plumber who installed it, at the Germans until the Germans literally ran out of ammo. A fact that makes the Russians so furious. Saying this in modern-day Russia will get you arrested.
Oh,
but it
yeah.
is the reality. You have to remember the context. Stalin's purges wiped out some of the best minds of the officer corps. Those who remained had that constant reminder over their head about the price of failure. They had outdated equipment, they had poorly trained men, their logistics network collapsed the moment Operation Barbarossa started, men were arriving at the front without guns, without ammo, sometimes without even shoes. I bring up the film The Enemy at the Gates quite a lot because it triggers the tankies immensely. There's a scene at the start where they're handing out guns and they don't have enough for
Great
everyone.
movie, by the way.
This
One of my
annoys the
favorites.
tankies because in theory, the Soviet Union was producing far more than it needed, and for them, that's the bottom line. I've got the data sheets right here. I've been to an archive actually. Checkmate, T-72. But in reality,
Yes, here's the big thing about this, and this is what always gets mistaken. Yes, the Soviets were producing more than enough rifles, ammunition, boots, tanks, all of that shit. The issue is, it wasn't getting where it needed to go. Just because you build it means jack shit if it doesn't get to where it needs to go. A gun is only useful once it's in the hands of a soldier. Bullets are only useful when they're in the gun held by the soldier. And the soldier is only useful when he's wearing boots. Proper boots. So yes, the Soviet produced all of that and more, but the problem is, like all crazy dictatorships and all crazy assholes, they care more about data sheets so they can wave it at the UN or something and scream, look at what we're doing, look at what we're doing, ooh, scary, 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 bow to your knees and kiss the earth and let us rule you. But it means jack shit if it's not getting where it needs to go. Why do you think? Say, oh, I don't know. The war in Ukraine is going in Ukraine's favor. Russia is not getting anything to where it needs to go. It was the same back then. It's the same right now. It's the same with a lot of big dictatorships. Look at China. Continuing on. Before I
that
get any
is what
worse.
did happen, not because they didn't have enough, but because it just wasn't getting to where it needed to go.
Exactly.
Modern-day Russia is in a bit of a weird superposition about this. They both want to claim that it didn't happen, while also claiming credit for the absolute miracle that Andrei Vykrulov achieved when he was able to fix it. Also, the sniper the film is about, Vasily.
It's fiction. We made it up. We made this one up. It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication.
Yeah,
Never
the
happened.
real story, yeah. It's historical fiction. No. Yes, the story Enemy of the Gates is historical fiction. It's more based off of, say, I call it the legend of Vasily Zaitsev, rather than the actual true story, because the actual true story is a little boring. Literally all Vasily did was run around with a sniper rifle and his sniper team, shooting enemy soldiers, and basically it was the infantry, and basically all they were doing was picking off important individuals to the point where literally, well, the Germans just collapsed but that was mainly due to the infantry, the winter, the logistics issues that the Germans were also having, among other things. Vasily was did he go up against big name snipers? He went up against some snipers. But yeah. So yeah, the story of Vasily Zaitsev, Enemy of the Great Gates, great fucking movie. Excuse me. But yeah. Very, very fabricated. It is not real. Yep. Yeah.
The point is, when Stalin demanded to know why they were losing...
In fact, funny enough, Vasily isn't even the greatest sniper in the world. That honor belongs to Simo Hayaha, a Finn who killed the Russians. Yeah. With no scope. Look him up. The White Death. Sabaton made a song you know you're a badass when Sabaton makes a song about you. They haven't made a song about Vasily yet. I don't think they ever will. But Simo, they did.
The Soviet commanders didn't have the luxury of saying, well, boss, our entire logistic system collapsed and you killed anyone who knew what they were doing, so, you know, this is kind of on you. Because that's how you go to Siberia. Yep. So they did what the Soviets have always done best. Remember the Kursk example I told you about way back in part 1? The watch factory, the televisions? There's a reason I brought those examples up. Yep, they reframed the narrative. They turned the bug into a feature, failure into doctrine. We didn't build crap tanks because our industry was collapsing. Oh no, comrade. We built simple, rugged, mass-producible tanks because we understand the nature of total war. We were driving the tanks straight from the factory to the battlefield. And in that environment, shortcuts are rewarded. If you find a way to reduce the time it takes to build a tank by skipping the quality control step, you get a medal, because raw output is the only thing that matters. And if you stop the assembly line for 5 minutes because you didn't have enough bolts to secure the engine in place, Beria has you shot. And not just shot, your family will be kicked out of the factory, and up in the Urals there's nowhere else to go. They depend on that factory for warmth, food, and sometimes even for a place to sleep. The T-34 as a tank sucks. Not because it's a bad tank per se, but because the country and the industry trying to build it were on the verge of collapse and utterly inflexible to change. The T-34's production run is not a monument to the prowess of Soviet industry and Soviet innovation. It is a monument to the fact that it is much, much easier to build excuses and pass the blame than it is to fix a broken system. I made a video about this some time ago. And so the myth of the T-34 becomes as much a part of that system as anything else. And when you are in the heart of the Union huffing its propaganda all day, you start to believe it. As such, there are many in the Union who cling on to this idea of the legacy of the T-34 and feel that in the obsession with the progression of technology, the Union was putting too much faith into wonder weapons, which is the mistake the Nazis made, of course. But unlike the American fighter mafia, whose description of wonder weapons includes radar and missiles, the Soviets were a little more grounded. They were more in favor of keeping weapons development on not technologically unadvanced weapons, but more on the meat and potatoes of warfare, by which I mean big guns, bombers, and lots of rugged, cheap, reliable tanks and equipment, often viewing things like the missile weapons favored by Khrushchev to be closer to specialist weapons, expensive with limited uses. A missile is a very expensive way of taking out just one tank, but a cannon? Well, that's cheap and reliable, and you can fire it as many times as possible, a lot faster than you can a missile. And at the same time, Khrushchev...
This is actually why you see something quite interesting with Russian aircraft. Like, if you look at images of Russian aircraft, especially from the Cold War era, you'll find that they weren't carrying that many missiles. Like, if you look at pictures of, like, the MiG-21, the 23, and so on, you'll see that they're holding, at the maximum, 4 missiles. 4. By that time, our F-4 Phantoms were carrying 8. And they were mixed missiles. They were short-range heat-seeking Sidewinders and long-range AM-7 Sparrows. Or we had... Literally, we were carrying more missiles on our planes than the Soviets were, and that was because the Soviets relied more on the gun. They relied more on dogfighting. Now, did it come into favor? Like I said, I know there's going to be somebody eventually in the comments that goes, well, what about Vietnam? Didn't the F-4 Phantom suffer in Vietnam? Yes, but that's because, yes, the missiles were brand new. They still had to work out the bugs. But we did have heat-seeking missiles at the time. They were older and not very reliable or compatible with the new model F-4 Phantoms and such. But they were very reliable and decently accurate. But they couldn't match up to like, say, the MiG-17s or 21s. That happens. And that happens with all technology. It does have some time to work out some of the bugs, and you're going to have some misses. But remember that in the end, we did end up getting a pretty decent air superiority over Vietnam. The only issue was we had a shitty tactic for it. Believe me, Vietnam has some issues. Has some issues that I'd love to talk about, but I'm not going to because I'm going to... That would sound like a rant, and it would go on for several hours. I do not wish to do that. I wish to laugh at the funny pig.
Is making a number of defense spending cuts, which will affect the Union's regular forces, and the general feeling is that the Union simply doesn't have enough money to fund these very expensive projects, as well as maintain all the, well, meat and potatoes that would do the actual fighting. Like the reformers, they believed the war would be won by those who maintained the highest output of production. That was the legacy of the T-34. But Khrushchev is far too popular a leader to go against right now, so everyone just kind of has to go along with his wacky ideas, regardless if they like them or not. But there are those in the Kremlin who favor other options, whether via loyalty or favoritism to certain designers or design bureaus, or their own ideas on what the future of armored warfare would look like. Sometimes that thinking would be influenced by gifts of money, because, you know, communism. What emerges from this is something the Soviets refer to as clans. This clan system is alarmingly complicated and closer to the clique groups of an American high school than anything else, but, you know, dialed up to 11. People can be in multiple clans, and clans come and go faster than the tides. Some days, one is in favor, the next day its name is a swear word. Larger clans tend to have lots of smaller internal clans who themselves may have secret clans known only to a select few, who themselves will have their own goals and objectives, and etc, etc. Alliances come and go, wars break out, witches are burned, goats are scaped, the whole system continues. But clans are not exclusive to the inner workings of the Kremlin. In fact, they become much more prominent and much more aggressive the further you get from Moscow.
Yeah,
because clans trade in the Union's one true currency: favors. For example, if you, say, work in a factory, you are guaranteed paid sick leave under Soviet law. But just because you are entitled to it doesn't mean you get it. No one just gets things in the Soviet Union. If you want sick leave, you need a sick note from the doctor, and those are hard to get. And what if it's not you that's sick, but maybe grandma's sick, and now you need to stay home and take care of her? Well, not having that sick slip could mean jail time. And you can't just do it anyway and explain yourself later, oh no, grandma's sick, you know. You need that note before you can do anything. Even if you get one later, you could still be facing prosecution. Now, Soviet medical care was great if there was an emergency. But this is not an emergency, so you could be waiting days, weeks, or even months to see one, depending on your local facility. So being part of a clan that includes, say, a medical secretary might mean you get to move up the queue to see a doctor a lot faster. And in exchange, maybe you get her some of that nice Polish beer that's a bit harder to get east of Moscow. Or maybe the clan includes a doctor himself who you invite round to dinner and he brings the slip with him. Or maybe it's the factory supervisor himself who, after agreeing to help his son with his math lessons, definitely remembers you turning up for work each day and has the paperwork to prove it. This is how society functioned in the Union, and procurement worked no differently.
Man,
and it's how these clans
for such a completely united Union, it seems very much like honestly, the more I read and listen in and figure out more about the Soviet Union, it starts to take on a more, honestly, the more I look at it, the best thing I can compare the fucking Soviet Union to is the Holy fucking Roman Empire. An absolute conglomeration of absolute, like, nothing, not united whatsoever, just following their local leader and oh my god, what a mess. No wonder it fell apart. Jesus. Oh my god. Now the way Russia was in the 90s is starting to make sense. Jesus.
Interact with each other that will take center stage over the next few years. However, for the sake of both the length of this video and my own sanity, we're going to have to dramatically simplify who these clans are and what each one is up to. I want to stress that the Soviets did not have a complete parallel to the fighter plane mafia back in the Pentagon. This is just the simplest way I can think of explaining it to you, okay? Not that I'm calling you stupid. I just know what you're like. So the first group of clans, we'll call them Group A. These are made up of the kind of people who looked back over the First and Second World Wars and have spotted this pattern, that if you have mass recruitments of peasants for the military, you end up with less peasants in the fields and factories and mines, which always led to a shortage of materials, a shortage of food, and a lot of very angry peasants who now also had guns and did nasty things to the commissars who came to collect the crops. Forcing entire families into the factories to compensate was all well and good in the Second World War when you really didn't have much of a choice, but the end result was a poor standard of equipment, which in turn led to more losses. But we don't need to do that again. We can prepare, and prepare well. We don't need to make mass-produced junk and hope to win through sheer weight of numbers. We have the manufacturing capability to rival America. We can make the best stuff en masse, stuff that rivals anything the West can do, built to an even greater scale.
Sure.
The red tide does not need to run blindly into gunfire. It can be smart. And NATO is not prepared to fight a smart enemy. So Group A believes in a larger professional army
where's
with
that smart
NCOs
enemy?
backed up by small amounts of conscripts performing rearguard and occupational duties, which would work best. They believe there's no reason the Soviets can't have the best equipment and the best training, and those who think otherwise are they're just living in the past. But the clans under Group B believe the opposite, that a professional army was all well and good, but as the Second World War proved, in war, casualties are inevitable and often very quick. Highly trained professional soldiers are difficult, costly, and time-consuming to replace, and hadn't really been all that effective to begin with. The Germans were, well, very well trained, and look what happened to them. And as the legacy of the T-74 has already proven time and time and time again, every war eventually becomes a war of attrition. And the victor is never the side with the best weapons, but the ability to replace losses the fastest and keep up the momentum. Thus, the bulk of any Soviet force should have the capability to be very quickly trained up, reinforced, with easily replaced mass-produced weapons. Those weapons should not be trashed. The Soviets should not fall behind the West in terms of technology, but an emphasis should be placed on what can be produced quickly and cheaply, and most importantly, not take that much training to use. With, of course, the fewer, better equipped professionals save the brunt of the fighting and only used when required. Because NATO can build as many smart missiles as it wants.
I've yet to meet one that can outsmart bullets.
Really?
And
You
then
used
there's the third
heavy?
with the
My boy,
special.
heavy?
These people believed, as in many of their rewrites of history, that the human wave tactic would win any war, and that Russia, sorry, not Russia, the Soviets, as always, could simply outgun and outman anyone who dared challenge them. That training troops was a waste of money, that you could always just execute a deserter or two to keep everyone in line, and that the complexities of any advanced weapon system would be lost in the typical peasant farmer. So what was the point in having them? We can ignore that third group, because they're stupid, and pay money for what's left of Twitter, thinking their opinions will one day mean something because the local radio stopped taking their calls years ago. So those in Group A obviously like the T-74. They believe the Soviet army should have the best technology and the best equipment that is available to them, and don't understand why they can't. Therefore, they are more willing to dismiss the T-64's teething problems as a minor annoyance that will be fixed with time, because that's what development looks like. That's what the T-34 looked like. Because, as is the philosophy of modern procurement, the best way to quickly identify problems and fix them is just to give it to the army and see how they break it. Minister of Defense Industry Dmitry Yutsinov is part of Group A, so he greenlights the T-64's production, teething problems and all. However, this makes Group B very unhappy. Group A is significantly larger than they are and holds a lot more influence, so for the moment all they can really do is just mumble and groan until Khrushchev is ousted in 1964 and replaced by Brezhnev, the man who thinks that Khrushchev, who put down the Hungarian People's Revolution by driving tanks into the city and massacring the populace, was too liberal. Enter a period of Soviet history where you can basically get what you want by leaning into Brezhnev and saying, Khrushchev would never have allowed this.
She's smooth.
The T-64.
And it isn't very nice when you left.
By 1967, it's kind of eventually recognized that the T-64 is a bit of a problem child, hampered by delays, setbacks, and various issues resulting from the rush development. And with the Americans producing M60A1s faster than my landlord producing reasons why the mold problem he caused is definitely my problem and I should pay to fix for it, the Union began to realize that its heavily tank-emphasized doctrine was not going to work if the Western Allies outnumbered them in terms of tank production, so a solution is sought. Now, the majority of the T-64's problems are usually attributed to the high-performance but compact opposed-piston 5T DF engine. This is a bit of an unfair assumption. The 5T DF engine is not that complicated a design. In fact, it's amazingly simple. The Ukrainians have been using a further evolution of its design in their tanks for years without any major problems. But if you talk to anyone about the T-64, they inevitably talk about the engines being problematic. Why? Well, brushing past a lot of the political stuff that we'll cover in part 3, it's actually got a lot more to do with maintenance than anything else. The T-64 is water-cooled, kind of. You see, in order to get it so compact, it uses something called injection cooling, which means it doesn't need this massive, bulky radiator fan, which saves weight, reduces noise, and makes the whole engine significantly less, well, bulky. Such engines were not new. The IS-8 or T-10 had the same setup, but the idea of it being a water-cooled engine is a bit deceptive, because it's not actually using water to cool itself. It's using a refined coolant fluid, which occasionally needs to be removed, filtered, and then replaced. And when you replace it, you have to mix it with water. Water which needs to be filtered. You see where this is going. Now, early T-64s are supplied with a filter, but then production issues start to creep up, and soon it's one filter being shared between, on average, 13 tanks. And rather than being kept with the tanks, it was often stored under lock and key in the supply chief's storeroom, because it's a valuable piece of equipment, and if someone breaks it, they're getting their ass smacked for it, and it's not gonna be me! So soldiers, being soldiers, find a way around this. And maybe they take the term water cooling a little bit too literally. Because we just need to mix it with water, right? But not the clean, filtered water we brought for drinking. God, no, we need that. So, I don't know, just mix it with any water. Rainwater, that stuff from the pond over there, urine. It's all fine, it works the same, right? I mean, the Maxim's water-cooled and you can basically piss in it and it'll work, so logic dictates. Well, there's a bit of a difference between a machine gun from the First World War and a modern battle tank. The unfiltered water clogs the filtration system, blocks up the coolant pipes, and the engine breaks down. Of course, soldiers who did this were quickly reprimanded, so they went back to clean filtered water pretty quickly. And when I say clean filtered water, I mean stuff from the tap is filtered, right? I mean, that's safe to drink, right? Well, Russia sits in what we like to call a hard water area. And in hard water areas, there's this thing called limescale. Yeah, that stuff that destroys people's dishwashers. That's what was building up in the T-64's radiators, causing them to overheat. This problem of lackadaisical maintenance is compounded by another issue that... Actually, you know what? Since you're here and we're talking about this, I need to go on a little side quest tangent. I hope you don't mind, right? Come with me, come with me.
Oh, before we get to the autoloader, which, believe me, I want to rant about so much too. Oh, because that actually got me in trouble once. First things first, yes, the T-64, the engine was a bit of a problem when improperly taken care of. This is the biggest issue with Russia, with all of their stuff, and it's the biggest issue that I literally, you know what? Let's call them the Chuds. Here's what we're going to do. Chuds have this issue. They have this issue where they basically think that if it's easy to maintain, they don't have to take care of it. It's the same thing with the AK. Oh my God, okay, note. I like the AK system. It's a great system. It's really, really good. And yes, it's reliable and durable. And you can, like, give it almost, like, the bare basic amount of care, and it will still fucking work. But just because it says, oh, you could give it the barest amount of care does not mean you can't give it anything. Seriously, it's fucking... Ugh. I hate these fucking people that literally go around and say... and get something and they're like, oh, I will never have to clean it, I'll never have to take care of it. The people who say that they can't, that they don't want to take care of it, means that they can't figure out how to. They're not smart enough to fucking figure out that something needs to be cleaned. These are the same idiots that will drive a car for fucking 30 fucking years without changing the oil, and then suddenly they're like, oh yeah, problem started like 20 years ago where the engine started coughing a lot and there's a lot of smoke. Well, have you ever gotten the oil changed? Hell no, that's a V8 engine. It don't need a lot of care or maintenance. What's your mileage? Oh, I go to the gas station every 2 days. Your mileage is that bad? And how's your towing power? Oh, I can only tow about maybe the little grill, but I can't carry much. But it's still a tough truck. Oh, these are the guys that make mechanics fucking scream. I swear. If you see your local mechanic sometime, give him a hug. Tell him that you understand that there are idiots out there and that you appreciate all the work you do for them. What they do for you. So yes, and this is the biggest issue with a lot of Russian shit. They don't take care of their stuff. When it's in the field, they don't take care of it. The best way I can, which is why, honestly, it's absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane how the Russians do not take care of their stuff. They literally, this is why they put so much effort into fucking wave tactics and just speedy assaults. They need to get this done before the engines conk out and the guns gunk up. There's a reason why there's such this idea of the warrior ethos, where basically it's the warrior must finish the job, must finish the battle quickly and efficiently. There's a reason for that. They need to get it done before they have to send their weapons back to an actual professional to be cleaned and maintained. They're warriors. They don't do stupid mechanic job. They don't do poor peasant work. They're warriors. They're warriors, and warriors don't care for shit. They just get what is best in life: to crush your enemy, have them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of the women. That is literally, it's so stupid, and it is so inefficient. Because by that logic, that means that all you have to do to defeat these guys is drag out the conflict. Why does this sound familiar? Oh yeah, it's happening right now. Oh, so yes, any engine, even very complicated ones, are good up until maintenance is required. Here is the thing. This is what it comes down to. Is the Germans had this problem, and now the Russians are having it. They didn't do proper maintenance on their engines because they expected to win outright and then not fight for another 3 weeks. The Americans, let's put this in comparison with the American tanks like the Sherman during World War II. They enforced maintenance checks. They always rotated tanks as often as they could to make sure that the tanks were properly maintained and shit. The crews were trained in maintenance and reliability. They were trained. If they were out in the field and something was wrong with their engine, they knew how to take it out and take it apart and to give it some bare basic maintenance. There are stories of Russian tank crews never even opening the engine hatch from one battle to another one 3 months later. Whereas fucking American tanks, they always got checked after every battle. It's a whole different thing. It's a whole different mindset. And honestly, it's a very bad one if you're not enforcing maintenance checks. Taking care of your equipment. This is why, take me, I'm a gun owner. I love maintaining my guns. I love making sure that they're clean and ready. But again, I know plenty of people that haven't done maintenance on their guns in months. And it drives me fucking crazy. And then one day, their gun misfires or jams or explodes. And they're like, what the fuck happened? I've seen that happen to an AK. It is not pretty and it hurt my soul. But the guy was just not taking care of his weapon. It's insane. Now, the autoloader. Oh, this one's gonna cause a lot of blood vessels to pop.
Alright, let's talk about autoloaders. For people with War Thunder brains who look at the baseball stats of a tank and think that's all that matters.
Now note this, I will acknowledge that in my previous video on my archive channel, I did make the mistake of assuming all autoloaders were wrong. And then one of my lovely fans actually told me that no, actually there are certain autoloaders that are good. Like, look at the French, look at the Korean, look at the South Koreans, look at the Japanese. They actually make great autoloaders. Then I actually looked into it and I'm like, huh, wow, so someone can do an autoloader right. It's just the Russian one that sucks. Continuing on.
The autoloader is a wondrous piece of technology with a range of advantages. You can make the turret smaller, it can fire faster, and you don't have a human getting slowly tired from loading all the shells. And thus, theoretically, you can use larger, heavier shells, etc., etc. Which is all fair enough. And with NATO considering moving up to the 130mm gun standard, I know they've been trying to do this for about 20 years and they'll never actually do it, but hey-ho. The thought is that the rounds might be getting too heavy for manual loaders, thus finally requiring the use of an autoloader. Russia was right all along! Of course, there's a reason NATO has resisted using autoloaders outside of the French for a very long time. Russia would tell you it's because we're stupid. The French would tell you it's because we're stupid, but actually, there's a reason for it. If there's one thing you should always remember, especially when you are dealing with tank nerds who get all their information from online sources, is that the main difference between the tanks in War Thunder and the tanks in reality is that the tanks in reality have to exist in reality. Reality which comes with mud, rain, small stones that get into awkward places, dirt, sand, metal fatigue, crew fatigue, idiot mechanics, even more idiotic drivers, etc., etc., etc. Tanks are, at their heart, a multi-ton armored box of
Where, in reality, everything has to follow RNGesus. In War Thunder, it's just the tank shell in the country it's coming from that determines whether or not RNGesus shows up. That needs to be, hey, War Thunder, make this for an April Fool's. Anytime the tank enters a different type of terrain, have the RGN thing roll a number to determine whether or not the mud gunks up the treads or something. Or when the tank gets hit, do a fucking RGN of whether or not the optics get fogged up. That's something that'd be interesting.
Farts and leg cramps, especially if you're in a British tank and you're stuck eating British MREs and have the unfortunate bad luck of dealing with whatever psycho made Meal Plan 4 and gave it to a group of 4 men trapped in an armoured box. A meal plan made out of beans, pasta and lentils. The Challenger 2 has a toilet on board.
Meal Plan 4, I've heard only stories about that. It's
anyway,
bad.
pulling back a tangent. Tanks are a machine trying to exist in a world where everything is built to make them stop existing.
Yep.
And this includes nature. And when you're done driving that 50-ton box at high speed through mud, rain, and rough terrain, guess what you need to do next when you're tired, hungry, your back hurts, your ears are ringing, and you want to do anything but look at a tank or smell of diesel fuel? That's right, maintenance. Tanks require an ungodly amount of daily maintenance to keep them going. And the thing is, when you're tired and now you have to do all your daily maintenance tasks, the chances that you fuck up because you're tired greatly increases. Western tanks like the Abrams try to get around this by generally being easier tanks to live with. They're roomy, they don't require much physical effort to operate, so though the crew are still tired at the end of the day, they're not nearly half as tired and as deaf and as sore as the crew of a T-72. The Abrams also requires less day-to-day maintenance, with most of it being done after the tank has reached a certain mileage or on certain days when other people are available to help.
Yes.
And the most ideal circumstances do it all for you. My source for this being the Ukrainian tankers I've spoken to, who seem to find the Challenger 2 and the Swedish-built Leopard 2, the Stridsvagn 122, by far the easiest to live with and maintain. But that brings us back to the T-64 and that massive glaring problem that is the autoloader and why it's not seen widespread.
And here's the other thing that I think that Pig's about to talk about is survivability, but we'll cross that bridge in a second.
Adoption throughout NATO. Imagine you're a Soviet tanker and you're trapped in this screaming, shaking coffin for hours at a time. It's freezing, you hurt everywhere, the tank stops, and now you have to do maintenance. Maintenance with only 3 people. The autoloader doesn't make the tank easier to maintain. It takes away 25% of your workforce. This is compounded by the problem that water-cooled engines are something you very rarely get in military vehicles, because by their own design, they are quite problematic. Every point of that water cooling system, every pipe, every tube, becomes a point of failure, meaning it has to constantly be checked and maintained, meaning you now have 3 chronically exhausted guys trying to maintain a mechanically demanding machine in the dying light and freezing cold, which means the chances something gets overlooked increases dramatically. Do we need to use the filter? Who's got it? Oh, it's all the way over there. Who's got the key? It's fine, just use regular water. Do we need to do this? You know what, it's probably okay. Just go get some sleep, comrade. And then the next day, the tank breaks down. Now, for all you Reddit historians now screaming into the comments, I'll admit, I don't have a source for that.
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
That's entirely speculation. There has never really been a peer-reviewed study on the difference in maintenance quality between 3- and 4-man tanks that I'm aware of. I got to this conclusion by looking at the entire Western military-industrial complex. You know, the people who actually build the fucking tanks and went and asked the armies whom they supply these tanks to, who instantly turned around and went, you know what, we kinda like having a 4th guy to hang around and hit things with a hammer. Because an autoloader will load the rounds for you, but it won't help you fix a thrown track.
Yeah, here's another thing that I think that the Western armies have over the Russian armies, and basically almost every fucking dictator, communist army. They actually listen to the guys on the ground. If a general walks up and he's like, "Hey guys, you're looking a little tired. What's going on?" Well, we need a 4th. We kind of like having a 4th guy here. I mean, it's kind of it works out better for us. We're able to get the tank all working out together. It's like, okay, you want more 4-person? Write that down and send it to the factory. We need more to Abrams, and we got to keep the 4 people. Got to keep the 4 people. What else do you guys need? Well, we could use a power tool set, so that way maintenance could be easy. A power tool set? I think we can provide that. Get Lowe's on the line. Or hell, I know commanders that say like, "Hey, we can't actually." I knew plenty of guys. 2003, the invasion of Iraq. They brought shit from home. They brought tool sets from home. I knew guys that were bringing fucking Milwaukee drill sets, lug nuts, and the whole shebang with them that was not government issue, and that worked out. That's the biggest thing that I actually think the Western militaries have, is that, like, we can't provide it. Well, a quick run over to Costco, Lowe's, or Home Depot, and we're all set. Whereas in Russia, it's like, no, you use what the state gives you and nothing else. Because the state knows what you need. We know better than you, puny peasant.
Back in the rain. The second thing they'll be screaming about is, well, none of that can be possibly true because the T-64s were exclusively reserved for the elite divisions, not the regulars or the conscripts. Okay. Let's talk about the word guards in the Soviet military. Now, to be fair, a guards division is usually a bit better disciplined and a bit better trained than the current stereotype of the Russian soldier might allow. And yes, the standard of what constitutes guards has increased significantly since the days of Stalin, back when they handed the title out like candy just to keep morale high enough so that the men wouldn't shoot themselves. Guards divisions typically had better training and were a bit more regularly drilled and drilled hard. But having the word guards in your title does not make you a superhuman mechanic who does not need sleep. If you want an example, other nations are not immune to this. British tankers deployed in Germany were trained to a very, very high standard and very regularly drilled. Yet, early chieftains were prone to high rates of failure because of their engine. Even though, like the T-74, if you maintain it correctly, if you follow engine startup procedure correctly, it works every time. Just because you are part of an elite force does not make you immune to fucking up. It is a cope excuse typically used by fans of the T-72 to bypass the idea that it was just poor maintenance which led to the tank's
There is
failure,
no
and not
Ubermensch.
because the
We're
engine was
all
too
a
complicated.
bunch of idiots. We all have the potential to be
Ukrainians have been
idiots.
using these engines for decades and have never had these problems. Why? They reduced the amount of daily maintenance tank crews had to go through and made sure each and every tank had a dedicated filter. But let's assume you're at the top end of the Soviet tree, on the upper tiers of the great game of telephone. All you are hearing is that there are problems with the engine. And because Morozov is being so humble about it, I did say that would be his downfall. He's not screaming that it's nothing to do with the engine, it's just poor maintenance of the coolant system. Which means when someone says it is the engine, there is no pushback. And if Morozov is being so quiet about it, maybe that's because he knows it's true. There's an obvious solution here. Simply replace the engine with a different one that works. But what engine? Because the V2 won't fit into it without a serious
V12 won't,
redesign, which means more delays, so what do? Well, where is this political pressure about the engine coming from? Who has nothing to do all day but kick stones and be mad about it? Well, do you remember Leningrad?
The
Every
T-80?
tank factory in the
Oh,
USSR is now gearing up to produce the T-64, but because of all the hoo-ha over its reliability, everyone has their own ideas on how to fix it. Leningrad is no
the
different. The clans
T-80.
that orbit the two tank factories of Leningrad are potentially responsible for fueling most of the early discourse over its engine, because they've developed their own engine, which they think is going to be the future. They've been experimenting with replacing the engine in their T-64 models with an early prototype for a gas turbine design. Where they got this idea, I can only imagine. But the Americans seem increasingly interested in the concept, so it's gotta be worth something. This would lead to the T-80, one of the best tanks the Soviets ever produced, so naturally
It is
they
a
hate
pretty
it. The
damn good
T-80 is
tank.
of course the Ferrari of tanks, by which I mean it's overly expensive, built from cheaper parts of other tanks, and will gradually fall apart while you're not looking at it. But it looks pretty, and by God do I want one. It is a tank with a few problems.
I gotta. It's like how I've always said. Russian tanks, they're absolute dog shit. They're the worst things ever built. They're so fucking ugly and just completely ramshackled. But god damn it, it's so ugly. It's cute, and I want one. I want a T-80. I want to drive that shit down to fucking McDonald's. Hi, I'd like a number 10, please. Large with a Dr. Pepper. Droll up. It's like, what's going on? yeah, just hang it on the gun. I'll bring it to me. Thank you. Have a nice day. That's what I want. They're so ugly. They're beautiful, and I fucking love them.
Among them, it drinks fuel faster than I drink apple juice, wishing it was scotch. I fucking love apple juice. I'm so happy with my life choices right now. The T-80's fuel consumption isn't measured in miles per gallon, it's measured in gallons per second. And Russia, a country that's basically a gas station with nuclear missiles for some reason, can't afford that. The T-80 sits in a weird place culturally, though like all Soviet tanks, its initial launch was not particularly successful. The design would go through numerous revisions and eventually abandon the gas turbine concept, which never really achieved parity with its American counterpart, for an upgraded version of the same engine in the T-64, resulting in the T-80UD, which stands at possibly the best tank the Soviets ever produced. The Russians, however, until losses in Ukraine merited its comeback, lambasted the tank as an abject failure due to its performance in the Chechnya War. This was caused by, you guessed it, maintenance issues. The conscript army Russia used failed to maintain and upkeep what was meant to be the tank to take on the Abrams. The T-80s and their
You gotta also remember, like, here's the biggest thing I think a lot of people will start questioning, and that's like, why couldn't they take the time to train these people? Why couldn't it? Well, there's probably a lot of reasons, like cost and time. They needed these troops to the front fast. But me personally, and this is just my own observation, so I'm putting a big fucking, like, putting a big fucking set of quotes here. This is my own personal opinion of this, and this is something that has to do with Russia regardless, and this is actually something Pig brought up in a previous video. Russia doesn't like those people. A lot of the old guard, Russia's not a big fan of advancements. Look at Putin. Putin got rid of anyone who might be a threat to him. He got rid of political appointments. He got political opponents who might be a threat to him because they were better than him and not psychotic like he is. He got rid of generals who might stage military coups. It's the same thing with Russia. The old guard in power who were once... Basically, it's the idea of this. It's my own personal theory. Think of it this way. There's a caveman. There's a caveman living in a cave, and there's another caveman a few miles away in his own cave. Now, we'll call him we'll go by caveman A and caveman B. Now, caveman A is scared of caveman B because what he's scared of is that caveman B, for some reason whatsoever, might come and take his cave and his caribou and kill him. So Caveman A goes over and attacks Caveman B first and takes his land, his cave, and his caribou. But then he discovers a new problem, and that is that Caveman B had other cavemen living by him. We'll call them C, D, E, F, G, respectively. But now what he's worried about is now that the other cavemen have seen that now Caveman A has 2 caves, more caribou, and safety, they might start getting smart enough to realize, wait a minute, I can do that too. So Caveman A begins slowly either whittling them down or making all the other cavemen children very, very stupid, so they never try to replace him. Doesn't that sound like an interesting theory that a bunch of idiots try spinning around? Literally, the human body. But then, suddenly, Caveman A gets too old, too weak to hunt any more caribou or fight his cave, so he's an old man. And now, but he's achieved his dream. The children of all the former cavemen that used to be around him when he took over Caveman B's land are too dumb to keep his land intact. So Caveman A dies of old age, but no one can replace him, and everything falls apart. That's my personal theory along the same sides as Russia. They don't want their people literate. They don't want them smart. They don't want them capable. Because if they rise up, that means that in 20 odd years or so, they could become an opponent for the old guard. I don't know what it's up with the elderly and trying to hold on to power. They're about to die anyway. Putin's old. He's ancient. Same with the rest of the people running Russia and the world nowadays. And they're like, no one can replace us. Yeah, we can. We're about to. Anyway, that's just my personal theory. Like I said, this is my own personal theory. I just don't think Russia trains its troops well, just so that way they can keep them compliant and easy to keep control. That's my personal theory. That's the basic bones of it. Continuing on.
Gas turbines were left running without auxiliary power packs, draining fuel, and making them easy targets for the Chechenian rebels that were veterans of the Soviet war in Afghanistan less than half a decade ago. In tactics similar to what would follow over the next 30 years, their flagship,
Well, yeah, we'll also remember the Iranians also were using, like, secondhand gear. Do we need to bring up what happened in 1991 when Bush and the Abrams showed up? Just saying. Just because watching 2 people fight with secondhand equipment, now that is going to be interesting, but if you watch somebody with secondhand equipment go up against a top-notch guy... Yeah, it's gonna be a tight race. It's not even gonna be a contest. Sorry. But yet, either way.
The final tank of the USSR lost its reputation overnight. In fact, Russia was so enraged by the humiliating performance, and possibly because of their inability to actually afford them, that the Russian Federation effectively banned all further gas turbines in tanks. This had the added benefit of allowing the Russians to lay the blame of their failures in Chechnya solely on the T-80 and its expensive, overly complicated design, and not themselves.
Yeah.
The online tanky world naturally followed this narrative. The T-80 was the gas guzzler, too complicated, too expensive, and at the end of what the chassis could realistically be upgraded to do, surpassed in fighting capability by the modern updates to the T-90 series. Fans of the T-80 do exist in that world and have often sat around smugly knowing their vaunted superiority would one day be proven, even as the unwashed hordes tried to diplomatically claim otherwise. Because the thing is, the T-80 represents something greater than just an upgraded T-64. If you've been ignoring the role of Soviet politics and military procurement up until this point, then the T-80 makes absolutely no sense. If all the Soviets want is a T-64 that works, then the T-80 represents that tank. Why then is this third tank needed? Well, that's where the politics of the Union come back in. How many tangents deep am I now? Okay, you know what? Let's move on. A major explanation, and not a wrong one, is that the USSR has decided against exporting the T-64 to other countries, including ones within the Union, because they fear the technology on these new tanks will be captured and studied by the West. Again, which does much to shroud the tank in mystery, and a few political commentators in the West start developing a deep paranoia about this new wonder tank. However, while it was still being tested, worked on and refined, the clans in Group B are becoming a little bit more active. They want their own tank design that fits their ideology on how they feel the future of warfare will pan out. They don't have the political power yet to cancel the T-64, but they are growing in strength. And thanks to the costly production of the 64, they're starting to gain a lot of allies. They have a proposal, and it's an interesting one. Because the T-64 is complicated and expensive, if we go to war with the West, we will inevitably take losses, and those losses will take a long time to replace. So would it be better having a second stripped down version of the T-64 without all the complicated computers and sensors and engine, and instead have an emergency mobilization variant that can be churned out very quickly and doesn't require a lot of training to master? It's a good idea, but the Soviet Union can't justify another mainline tank in production along with the 64 and the 62. Well, that is about to change, because now it's 1967, and it's time for the Suez Crisis.
Thank you for the follow, Clips. Appreciate it.
Soviet ally Clyde.
Ah, yes, the Middle East. Everyone's favorite sandbox. I am sick of this all playing in the sand bullshit. Oh, and we're starting with Nasser. Yay! Egypt.
An all-round charming guy, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser expels UN forces from the Syrian Gaza regions and closes the Straits of Tiran. This ignites what will become known as the Third Israel-Arab War, known as the Six-Day War, because that's how long a coalition of Arab nations was able to last in their third time's a charm gambit on seizing the only piece of Middle East real estate that doesn't have oil. I'm glossing over a lot of politics because I don't want to talk about them, or more, I don't want to talk to the people who do want to talk to me about them, so there. No, I'm not letting Anarchy back in. I can hear you pounding on the door!
The Israeli biological weapons program, dude,
Someone go get an Anarchy, please.
Please, come on. Only 5 minutes. 5 minutes, in and out. 5 minutes, I promise.
Needless to say, there's a lot that goes on in this war. It was a
Yeah.
catastrophic intelligence failure for the KGB. However, we're glossing over that because what's more important for the
We
topic
are
of
watching
this video?
Laser Pigs Part 2 of the T-72 sucks. We're learning about we've currently been learning about the history. Unfortunately, we're a little late, but that's no problem. You can go check. You can always rewatch this eclipse on my YouTube channel. There should be a link somewhere, I hope. Or at least in my archive. I'm still working on shit. I'm sorry, Eclipse. I'm sorry. I'm still working. I made a big transition. I made a big change. I'm trying.
Is that the Arab nations want tanks. New tanks. Lots of them. And they were prepared to buy as many as Russia was willing to sell. But as stated before, the T-64 combined a lot of new technologies that the Soviets were not quite willing to sell to other nations, lest they fall into the hands of the West, as things in the Middle East do because it's the Cold War sandbox. In addition to the problems of the T-64 was cost. They were far more expensive than the T-62, and what those nations were looking for was a cheap modern tank that they could use to quickly bolster their own forces. During the same period, a lot of recently decolonized African nations had started purchasing the T-55, simply because it was cheap and it was what was available. And in the wars they were fighting, simply having a tank show up on the battlefield was enough to make all the difference,
T-55 is
regardless
actually
of the
kind of the
quality
perfect tank for
of
African
said
conflicts.
tank.
So, yeah.
Group B finally has an opening, and they have a pitch. So here we are. The Kremlin suddenly realizes that there's a lot of money to be made in the export market. However, continuing to export increasingly obsolete T-55s meant that they would have to continue producing not only new T-55 hulls, but also spare parts and potentially upgrades forever, which, as a result, would affect their capability to mass produce the newer model tanks for the domestic market. What they need is a tank that is capable of being mass-produced, powerful enough to remain competitive against Western designs, and cheap enough to be exported not only to Warsaw-Pact countries, but also flogged to budget militaries across the world, where its only likely opposition would be lightly armed civilian protests, armed CIA-backed militias intended on destabilizing your supreme reign. Now, where to find such a tank? Enter stage right, protege of the great Morozov, chief designer at Euro, and lead designer of the T-62, Leonid Kotsev. And what would happen next would be the greatest pissing contest in the Soviet history. But that's for another time, because I haven't finished that part of the video yet, and I need to pay rent. If you liked this video,
Fair enough.
remember to subscribe. If you didn't like this video, subscribe anyway, because it's the last thing your enemies will ever expect you to do.
Yeah, do the same with mine, please. Oh, fucking A, pig. Fucking A. Oh, well, that pretty much ends that video for a while. Oh my god. But now, the dog is exhausted. I didn't expect to be talking about the Soviet infrastructure and shit like that. So we're gonna call this stream. And plus, tomorrow's my day off, so heads up. So the next stream will definitely be a game stream, because I miss playing games, and I'll see if I can't get some more people. We might play some Phasmophobia or something. I might talk some friends into that. Might be fun. But yes, thank you everyone for watching. If you liked the video, if you liked the stream, please drop a follow or maybe a subscription on Twitch. If you like this on YouTube, please by all means subscribe, leave a like, and make sure to ring the bell so that way you get notified of streams and videos coming up. And of course, thank you for everyone who followed/subscribed today. I appreciate everyone as always. But now I'm gonna go do a little bit more maintenance on my channel to make sure everyone has proper links. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll catch you guys all in the next stream.